Fatimah Asghar shows us the many faces of sisterhood when tested by the constant waves of grief and neglect in their debut novel, When We Were Sisters. Kausar, Alisha, and Noreen are suddenly orphans after the murder of their father and the death of their mother years prior. Their uncle takes the girls away from the only home they've ever known and forces them to grow up in a run-down apartment abandoned for weeks, sometimes without food and adult supervision. We mark the end of our second literary year with our interview with Fatimah as they speak about the creative format of centering this story around the girls while leaving the adults nameless and at times redacted. They also share what it was like to approach this story of grief during the early years of lockdown and what it means to give oneself the permission to create beyond the limitations of others. Stay with us on another episode of the Vulgar Geniuses podcast. Are you currently looking for a bookstore that has a great selection of books? Well, Kizzy's Books and More is that bookstore. Visit www.kizzy'sbooksandmore.com to purchase your next book for our book club. Use coupon code VulgarGenius to receive 10% off the subtotal of your first order. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Vulgar Geniuses. We are your hosts.
My name is Denny.
And I am Veronica. And today we are joined by our March Book of the Month author, Fatimah Asghar, author of If They Come For Us and When We Were Sisters, is a poet, filmmaker, educator, and performer. They are the writer and co-creator of Brown Girls, an Emmy-nominated web series that highlights friendships between women of color. Along with Safia El Hahilo, they edited Hala If You Hear Me, an anthology that celebrates Muslim writers who are also women, queer, gender nonconforming, and or trans. They are also a writer and co-producer on Miss Marvel on Disney Plus and wrote episode 5, Time and Again. Thank you for coming to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. This is a momentous occasion.
So we celebrate our anniversary in April. So books come to us we consider March our December. Every year our books in March have always would close us in a very good way. Like, we are so grateful that we picked your book to close our year for Vulgar Geniuses.
Yes, this is definitely a beautiful treat, and we cannot wait to talk to you about it. But before we do that, I'm going to pass it off to Denny, and she is going to go through our little hot seat moment.
Yes, just a little getting to know you. You mentioned Ashanti and Evanescence in your book. What songs would we hear on little Fatima CD player?
Oh my God, one of my favorite musical artists when I was a kid was Ja Rule. And so you would definitely hear a lot of Ja Rule. You would hear a lot of Evanescence, a lot of Ashanti, a lot of I grew up in the 90s and the 2000s. So there was a lot of things I loved, 3LW were people I loved. There was a lot of that kind of music of that era that was just my soundtrack to everything.
That's my college right there.
If you are given a chance to obtain a superpower from the Marvel multiverse, what would it be?
Oh, that's a really good, probably telepathy. I think that's a really, I think about Professor X, Charles Xavier. I think that's a really cool power.
A dollar store item must have.
Ooh, definitely. Well, I love candy, so I usually get a lot of candy at the dollar store. And candy and juice is kind of what I love to get at the dollar store. Yeah.
As a poet, what is one of your most favorite sentences to read in one of your poems?
Or do you have a favorite poem?
I like reading Old Country Buffet, that poem. I think it's like I used to teach a lot in high schools, and I think when I would go and teach in high schools, like they don't care about your bio, they just want to be entertained. And so to have like a poem that's gonna like grab them, and so something like Old Country definitely would do that.
Mm.
So, like we were talking about earlier, your book, When We Were Sisters, it is a story that traces this intense bond of three orphan siblings who, after their parents die, are left to raise one another.
Mhm.
I was so, like, I'm gonna be honest with you, I was so intimidated by your book. I was like,
Mm.
who is this person that wrote this wonderful book? So I was like, when we were trying to make questions, I'm like, I have no questions for her. I just want to listen to her talk.
Oh, that's really kind. That's really kind. Thank you so much.
So, I feel like I have a confession of some sorts to make. I feel like this is the time where I should issue an apology to our previous guests, because reading your novel was the first time where I saw that writing is truly an art form that is often not seen as such. It's normally seen as just like this very structured thing. And your work encapsulated this fact through your use of combining poetry and prose to tell us the story of these three sisters. How is your approach to writing, knowing that it is an art form and should be treated as such?
Thank you. That's a really beautiful compliment. And so thank you for saying that. I've always thought of poetry or writing in general as a really deep art form. And I think about even as a screenwriter, like what was one of the most like heartbreaking things for me when I started to do screenwriting was people kind of treating screenwriting like it wasn't an art form, or treating screenwriting like it was a blueprint. Like they were like, oh, it's the blueprint. It's really like what goes on. But I don't find that to be true. And I even think about like when a lot of the ways that I would read plays or consume plays, like I couldn't always go to see them. Like sometimes you would miss the run, or sometimes the tickets were too expensive, but I would read a lot of plays. And so for me, there was always a component of theater, of film, that is purely just the writing and the mechanic of seeing the language on the page and imagining a world of these characters. And so, with poetry and with novel writing, like I seriously think of that as such a beautiful terrain where you can do so much with writing. And part of the thing is I want the experience of I always remember this when I would read novels. I would always underline, one of my exes was saying this, but because they were looking through a novel that I had like read and gave to them, they were like, all of your underlying things, they have nothing to do with the plot. They're always about like the sentence that's beautiful. And I was like, yeah, because I'm a poet. Like, yeah, like I might not remember the plot actually, but what I remember is how I felt reading it. And I remember how the writing elicited something in me. And books for me have always been, and writing has always been first and foremost a place for that. It's always been a place where I can kind of create by reading, access a world around me, and feel like I could live there. And so it's such an art form. It's such a transportive art form for me. And so in terms of both writing and reading, I find it to be one of the just a very enjoyable experience in terms of wanting to create something that deeply moves people and isn't just about plot, or isn't just about facts, or isn't just about how do I get this across in the in the clearest way. It's often actually, how do I get this across in a way that enhances the experience of the reader.
I'm glad that you said that, because one of the things that we've noticed from certain authors that we've spoken to who started with poetry first, their books are always so good, because there's this like dedication to understanding not only just the sentence form, right, but how words play within that sentence and the picture that you can paint. And no discrediting, no shade to anybody else, but there's just something special about having a book written by a poet. And I just absolutely love it. And we definitely just saw it pour throughout every every single page, even down to the structure. Which brings me to when we're talking about the moment where we find out that these 3 young girls have lost their father, and the death that has happened in their life. And you've allowed the reader to find out in this way that is like this gossip type style of conversation, that spider webs its way through a community and is done with this phone ringing, and then it is followed up with just a sentence from each auntie that receives the call. And you allow readers to piece together that the father has died recently, and is following the death of the wife and has left these 3 daughters. But as you allow this information to be divulged between the aunties, you leave out the father's name. And then we see it happen again when the adults are talking to the children about them losing their father, and moving in with this unnamed uncle. Will you talk to us about the exploration of details and playing with the very ways that you can relay important moments within the story in this fashion?
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's such a good observation, because I actually haven't thought about that part of that's the opening paragraph, is the Ya Allah, the ring, Ya Allah, like that's the whole opening paragraph. And I actually haven't thought about that since I've released the book, and no one has asked me about that. But yeah, I think that there's a way where in South Asian communities and Muslim communities that I know, like the aunties, what they say rules everything. Like I've heard that about like most immigrant and communities of color, is like the aunties are the ones who know everything, and they're the ones who are on the phone, always talking, always being like, and then this thing happened, and da da da, and this. And so even in the part of starting the book that way, it shows a kind of perspective of like how things are warped by what people say. Mm-hmm. And it introduces this thing too that I think is so prevalent in South Asian and Muslim communities around your reputation being, and like what people say about you, even in death, as being the most important and paramount thing about you. So it's about how people talk about you and how you're perceived by everyone else. And that becomes such a huge thing. And you see it run throughout the book, like, is like how they're being perceived, how the uncle is, his narrative of himself, how all of this stuff is going on. And then in terms of like the details of like never mentioning the father's name, and then the redaction of the uncle, those are really intentional things to me. And in part, when I don't mention the father's name, it's bracketed, right? So there's just empty space. You just see the emptiness. And to me, that really got at the void of the emptiness of death, of someone's gone, and suddenly the way that they're spoken about, or the silence around them, and the silence around things like even not hearing their name or not hearing that be said anymore, is such a damning silence. And so for me, it was really important to do that. And then to also remember that these kids are really young when they lose their dad. And at that point, they probably don't even know his name. They call him dad. Like, they don't, when you're kind of that young, you might not know your parents' names. You're just like mom, dad, or auntie, whatever. Like, you don't always know the names of people. But what you know is your relationship to them, who they are to you. And that's how you learn them. And so that's a little bit of that. And then with the redaction of the uncle and the kind of thing around that is, I wanted it to feel close to the reader, right? And I think when we have like fictional characters sometimes, and we put a name in or something like, oh, this person, they can feel like character that's outside of the reader's worldview. And something like a redaction makes it feel close. It makes it feel like it's right there. And so there's kind of, and I wanted it to feel like that strike, that redaction and the scarring of that, but then also to kind of have the reader auto-populate their own name, like whatever name that they think. And I think it's really interesting because people really thought of people, like they were like, oh yeah, I thought of this person in my family, or I thought about this person of someone I knew, or this person of whatever. And it's surprising how quick that can happen when you see something like that, when you see that redaction. And so to me, again, it was considering the experience of the reader and what I wanted to evoke from them, not just through the writing itself, but the way that the writing was being presented.
I really feel like it, for anyone that is pursuing like this writing career and they pick up your book, it says that you can do whatever the fuck you want when it terms of how you want the story to be told. And, you know, like fuck form, like create a new form that will fit for you, because what you've done is allowed the reader to really be immersed into the story and be pulled in and like, okay, wait a minute, what is this that's happening in this conversation? And, you know, like you're having to flip the book or flip the page or whatever, and you're like, oh, this is something brand new. And it really feels like it does this like misfiring in your brain of what you think is literature when you're reading it, and you're like, oh no, this thing is infinite, it can be whatever you want it to be. So I want to thank you for doing that.
Thank you for saying that. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, because when I was first, like, it was such an experience, like holding your book and like also listening to the audiobook while reading it, because then you would see like why the narrator would like pause, and why would be like, you know, redacted, and then you'll see that just like, you know, that blank black like highlighted space. And when I twisted your book, I'm like, oh, this fits together. It was just kind of like this whole experience, like, oh, like what you said, like it could be anybody from your family. It could have not been an uncle, it could have been anybody else. It could have not been a father. It could have been anybody else. And I just wanted to agree also on the fact that, you know, like a lot of communities of color use the aunties to like call, and like it's a chain.
Yeah.
It follows this like form of like almost kind of like this its own truth at some point, whether positive or negative, you know.
Right.
It creates this some sort of boundary that sets like a setting for one community almost. It's so I think because of that, your book was so relatable to an extent, I think, that we haven't touched for a minute. That's why we were like so blown away of like how it can be for anybody, literally. So, you know.
Thank you. That means a lot. Yeah. And it's so interesting, that thing that like the aunties are just so funny to me, because it's really even the thing that you were saying about like it becomes its own truth. But even in that, like when in the way that the aunties talk, like sometimes, you know, and it can become its own truth. And my friend Krista Franklin, who's an incredible author and visual artist, has a book called Under the Knife, which is like an artist book. And in it, she says this thing about how she was like, sometimes I don't know what's actually fact. Like if the stories my family tells about themselves are fact, but they kind of become their own fact because my family chooses to tell them. And I think that there's something about that. There's something about like the way that something can become a fact when enough people have said it, you know, when enough people are on the phone talking about it, when enough people are talking about it internally, and then it can become kind of a fact, even if if what happened was a little bit different or a little bit more complicated than that. And how interesting that is about how we tell stories and how they can kind of become their own version of an event in our heads or in our families. And then that gets passed down generation to generation, you know, and the fact of that.
Yeah. That really makes me think about like that, you know, when you're talking about memory, and though that this is fiction, you have some writers who are writing in memoir form, and you're talking about memory, and you're putting these stories that you've told yourself over and over that this is how it happened, but knowing like time sometimes can misconstrue some things, can change some details in the story. And just like within that phone call, you know, there could be some added details in there that wasn't there in the very beginning when that conversation happened. So yeah, you can definitely see how those changes can take place.
Yeah.
So, you know, because we really love your book and your writing, we appreciate your finesse and gentleness when writing about death, sexuality, and religion, and integrating your characters in it. How are you able to pull such rawness in that, this actually constitutes and imbibe your characters while staying true to your style and craftsmanship.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think that in terms of even thinking about the characters, there were several things. One is that the bulk of these characters are very young. So the three siblings are very young. When you're young and you're pressed up against impossible circumstances, like it's hard because then things like, a character's meanness feel like the end of the world, but also they're young. And so there's the thing of like, you're a kid and you're kind of allowed to be mean, or you should be allowed to be mean, or you should be allowed to have that space. And it kind of speaks to like the impossibility of the situation, that these kids aren't allowed to have that space, that like their actions are so magnified because it's so, their survival is so critical, and it's so critical on each other when they're the only ones who they have, they're the only consistent thing in each other's lives, and how detrimental that can be. And then even in terms of, I think that it's pretty clear that the most damning character, or the one that does a lot of harm, is the uncle, right? Is that uncle. And in it, what I tried to do was explain how he's seen through the eyes of Kausar. So when she's a kid, she can't see him with a lot of nuance. He's just the uncle, like he's just this uncle, and he's this character. And then the older she gets, she starts to see him with more nuance, and it gets complicated because he then no longer is just this evil character or this man. He becomes this other thing, and he becomes more of a human, and a human with pain, and a human who's not holding that pain well, and who's in charge of her, but a human that is still a human nonetheless. And it's been interesting because upon releasing it, like I've talked to a bunch of different people, or friends of mine, close folks who've read the book, and they've been like, it's so interesting because some of them are like, I really appreciate you putting in a lot of layered complexity about that uncle and making him more than just a villain. And then some people are like, yeah, I see what you did. I don't care. I don't like him. Like, and being like, I don't forgive him. Like I don't forgive that character in that book. You can forgive him. That's cool if you want to do that. I choose not to. And I think that that's so fascinating because you're like, yeah, like, but that's the case with anything. You talk to a friend who dated an ex like 7 years ago, and they're like, yeah, I've forgiven them. And you're like, I don't forgive them. Like, that was not okay. And I think that what's interesting is that it's such a human response, right? It's such a human response to have so many different kinds of responses to characters, how the characters have different responses to each other. And I think the thing I'm most interested in is not a thing that judges, even though it's really hard to really write something where there's no judgment in it. Like, of course, you're going to see judgment throughout the book, and the character's judgment, and then my judgment as a writer, and the author and stuff. But ultimately, what I really wanted to do was get at some of the complications of what it means to be human, and the stickiness of what it means to be human. And so in order to do that, you have to be able to say, these characters are really complicated, and they're growing up, and they're all in a really complicated interdependent system where they all are exploiting each other, abusing folks, doing harm, loving each other, taking care of each other, trying to find kindness when they can, and trying to make it work. Like, that's the complication of all of that book at any given moment, is that no one is even clearly good or bad. Even when you think about Kausar, the person who you spend the most perspective in, there are these moments where she does things that are really cruel, really mean. She does things that are hurtful to other people. She holds resentment and holds grudges and does all this stuff, and sometimes doesn't, can't help her siblings and things like that. But she's a kid, and she's a human, and she's dealing with a lot. And so for me, it was really important to try to get as close to a lived reality as I could, instead of just archetypical characters.
And you touched a little bit on Kausar, and I just wanted to ask, when we are introduced to this sisterhood within this story. The viewpoint is told through the eyes of Kausar, the youngest sister. Why did you decide to not only tell the story from the youngest sibling, but it to be done in this first person narrative that also gives space for voices of the mother and the father later on in the book?
Yeah, I think for me, this was just always Kausar's story. Like when the story came, when I started to write it, it was always first person, always in this character's voice. It was coming really, really quickly. And it was like, oh, and I was like, I don't know who this character is. I'm just writing things down. I'm just seeing where it goes. And then I was like, oh, like this is this character who wants to talk to me and wants to come through and wants to talk about this thing. And then, the moments where, so it's pretty much predominantly, like you were saying, in that first person voice. And the first section is a third person that kind of, like you said, starts with the aunties, talks a lot about the uncle and his relationship, which we kind of very rarely see in the book, or that's the most kind of like opinion that we get about the relationship versus just then seeing it experientially. And then it's Kausar's voice, and then we see the dad, several moments of the dad, and then the mom's voice. And to me, it's because I wanted to also introduce this character in context. And I wanted to say that this character, yes, you're getting a full throttle, like first person perspective, like view of what's going on. But then you also get these vignettes into the people who made her. And you get the vignettes in the people who made her, who she'll never know. So there's a kind of heartbreak that you get because you're seeing the dad and you're seeing the mom, but Kausar isn't seeing those things, and she and her sisters are not having any experience of seeing those things. And so what they're experiencing is, just this kind of world in which they're not really being taken care of or loved. But then you see that there were people who really loved them and who really wanted them. And that's what brought them into this world. And I think it was just really important for me to include that in a book that contained a lot of hurt, to include that there's something that was beyond what they even knew, and like most of us, we come from people, and those people are complicated, and those people have love and dreams and hopes and ideas for their kids, and then they also have the things that they're up against, and we see that in those sections. Like we see them be up against things. We see the mom be up against an illness. We see the dad be up against the hustle of trying to take care of these kids, and being a single dad trying to figure it out on his own before something tragic really happens, and we see that them exist within the context of these kids, but also exists outside of the context of these kids. And I think that was really important for me.
Yeah, I think it really made a lot of sense to me when I read like the dad and the mom's the kind of like account of themselves, because like you said, we come from people, and it just made it, because I think when we read stories, especially like yours, we have to think about like the age of these children, what they are. So they're just being pushed out into this world for all these experiences. But then there's kind of this like little glimmer of hope that there's like in the background, somebody wanted these children to be here.
Yeah.
And for unfortunate events like human life, these things happen to regular people. We see it every day, whether we like it or not. But it really humanized, like, oh yeah, these children were wanted and loved even before they were conceived, even before they were brought out to the world. And hopefully that they at some point also reach that point where they would feel that there were people that loved them. And
Mm-hmm.
that it's like a 360 moment for me when I read those. But like you said, it was heartbreaking, but it was necessary for the story.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, one of the things that I always look at when reading a book is just like the body of the person within the story. And the body is definitely explored a lot throughout this novel. From the very beginning, we see the sisters constantly being touched during the mourning of their father. as women rubbing their unclean hands through their hair, the sexual advances and physical abuse that Kausar endures from Bobby and Aisha's cutting. What did you want to explore about autonomy within this novel?
I wanted to explore, like, there is so much. Like, I think I wanted to explore what happens when like the siblings are right up on each other and there's not really a lot of room for autonomy. Like, so even when they're growing up, they're kind of constantly called each other's names. They're grouped into each other. They're enmeshed in this way. They are really, really like, they flatten and they become the same, you know? And I think that's like one aspect of them, you know, is that they kind of come up in this way that feels really, really codependent and really like there's no identity separate from each other. And then the break of like Kausar deciding to leave and be like, I can't do this anymore and I have to just go, you know. And even the confusion of a body, you know, and being like, I don't really know what's happening with my body, including when someone is touching me and touching me in a way that I'm not really quite sure about what this touching is or what this touching feels like. And I think that feels really, to me, accurate about like feeling sometimes when there's not really a lot of boundaries in how you're growing up, and the way that you're even taught to disregard your own boundaries and your own self and what you need, you know, and how sometimes it feels like you need a clean cut or a clean break from the environment that you're in order to even get a sense of who you are outside of that, you know. And even then, Kausar is like, in the older version, it's like all these people, all these lovers who come and touch me and their fingerprints stay on me and I don't really know who, like, I don't, their faces all mix and all of this thing. And even the desire and the search for autonomy and how difficult it is when you grew up in an environment where that wasn't possible. Like it wasn't even possible to have that, you know. You're sharing a twin bed with your sibling. Like there's no possibility to have autonomy under those conditions. And then what does it look like to have it? And so to me, that felt really important, as did recovering from deep dissociation, right? And I think that is such a huge part of sovereignty and autonomy, is like reclaiming those parts of you that you discarded, that you didn't want to have anything to do with, that you thought were like not good or not acceptable, and or were so traumatized that they stayed frozen in a certain moment, and then reclaiming that.
Yeah, even while you were speaking, I was just thinking about the girls, like you were mentioning, them being in that space together and being, you know, no room. There's that space, but there's this widening, this distance that's coming between them as they gradually get older and trying to like decipher all of what they've been through for themselves, right? And the things that are said that can't be taken back, that, you know, that they're trying to figure out, how does one navigate this relationship with the sister who has just said this horrible thing to them, and that space of like, now I gotta go back home and be in this bunk bed in this room with this person who just said something that was really horrendous to me.
With no space, with no ability to be away from you. Yeah. And no adult to come in and be like, that wasn't cool. Like,
Right.
I think that, oh yeah, go ahead.
I think that to me was kind of like, because I am one of three sisters. So, you know, like that's why I think this really kind of hits home, because it's like, this could have been me and my sisters, or this could have been like, you know, like everyone else in my family. But the fact that I would like, the thing that really blows my mind is like, you know, the lack of presence of like an adult authority figure, but them to be able to figure out what they need to do, and was forced to do that from a very young age. Because I'm the eldest, I could never be Noreen. Like I don't know, I would probably lose my mind before I would never be able to feel her shoes. Because even up to now, having my own child, I'm like, how did we end up this way?
Yeah.
You know, like one day you would wake up like, I'm allowed to be a parent. Like, what happened?
Yeah.
And then some days I read your book and I'm just like, nobody should have allowed me to do certain things in my life.
Yeah.
And then you see this, three girls just trying to like strive for, survival.
Yeah.
So you showed us through Kausar that an example of how childhood trauma can manifest, while you're trying to live your adult life. But these sisters managed their lives in the way that they knew best. They moved on and reached a space as adults where we saw them owning their lives. At the end of the novel, you feel a vindictive sense of hope that they would be all right. How important was this tone change when you were writing this towards the end of the novel?
It was really important to me that there be some kind of hope that happens, and that even in the possibility of distance and space and separation, there's still the possibility of a better future moving forward. And so that felt really important to me to include. And then in terms of, because originally when I had a lot of the early drafts of the novel, the mother section was the last section that the book ended on. So that it was going to end on that, which meant that the final words that the book was going to end on was, "Goodbye, my angels, goodbye." And that read was a devastating read. Like when you read it that way, when that was the final section, it was really devastating. It was, it was a very, very devastating read. It was very effective, but it was very devastating. And there was a moment where I was like, I can't do that. Like I can't end the book like that. I can't end this book that's already so heartbreaking about these three siblings with this devastation. And then the section that is the ending now came to me, the one about the trees. And I wrote it. And at first I was like, well, maybe it's the beginning, maybe it's the middle. Like I was thinking about where it was. And then it felt like actually a really natural ending. And it felt like because it was kind of a zoomed out approach of like looking at everything and being like, look at the way that cycles regenerate, and so then it meant that the book ended on before going back into the earth, before becoming something new. And so it ended on the word new instead of the word goodbye. And that felt to me like the way I wanted to go, was the idea that there could be rebirth, the idea that there could be regeneration, and the idea that something new could happen, versus the cycles that these siblings had continued to be in for so long. And so that's why I chose that, and that's where it came from. But for a long time, that wasn't the ending. The ending was quite different. And even though that section is still in there, it changing the order of it made it an entirely different book almost. And that's really fascinating, is how important order is, how important sequence of events is, how important a shift like that, because if the book had been different, it would have felt really different.
Let me follow up and ask you, what does revision mean for you then? Not only like within just that ending within the story, but you as a writer, when you're sitting down to these pieces and you're trying to rethink how you want things to go, that this could have ended, this could have been the ending, this could have been done, but leaving that space open. What is revision for you?
Yeah, revision is like the most important part of writing for me. And it's like the one I hate. Like it's always, I think it's so funny because no matter how much you write, or at least for me, no matter how much I write, I'm always like hopeful for the myth that I'll just be able to write one draft of something and it'll just be genius, where I'm like, oh, and every time I'm devastated that it doesn't happen that way. I'm like, oh, you mean I have to like really sit and tinker and work on this thing, and think about things and think about every line and think about how things are being read. And to me, revision makes the book. Revision makes something go from something that's like in your notebook to then something that's like quite that can be shared, you know, that can be in the world, and that can be something. And revision is really important, because you know, you do things where you repeat the same things. Sometimes the plot doesn't make sense because you thought this thing and then this thing, and you have to go back and revise, and you have to go do this. And then, like I said, sometimes it's actually thinking about, what is the emotional component of this, and how do I want to develop it? And even I think about like early drafts of the book, the uncle didn't have as much humanity. Like that was something that I back worked in, because I was like, oh, he's not coming across three-dimensional. Like I have to do some work in order to like make him three-dimensional. And so, and make him so it feels real, where he's still as scary as he is, but we're doing this thing where he's a human, you know, and we're valuing his humanness. And that was really important. And I think these things around, you don't get that on the first go. You know, sometimes you're just pouring out whatever's coming out, and you have to go back and you have to revise, and you have to cull, you have to use your expertise to really bump out the stuff that doesn't need to be there, and to be honest with yourself and say, am I in love with this line and it's not actually doing anything for the book? Or am I in love with, because so long my idea was that we were going to always end it on the mother. We were always going to end it on, it was from the beginning. That's what I thought, you know? And it was really a moment where I had to be like, I know this was my original idea, and yet this isn't working. Or if I do this, it's not that it's not working. It's that, is this how I want the reader to feel after they're done with my book? Or do I want them to feel different? And so I had to change it, you know? And that was something that no outline could tell me. That was only something that I could do. I don't write with outlines anyway, so that's a moot point. But it was something that I was like, no one else is going to tell me this. Like I have to sit here with this book and realize that actually some things need to be shifted in order for me to tell the story I want to tell in the way I want to tell it.
Have you always been this intentional and like so passionate about this art form that you create? Because I can feel it through the screen.
Yeah, I take this work really seriously. Like, you know, I think that it's really important to me, and I feel really lucky that I get to do this, and I feel really lucky that I get to write anything, you know. And to me, it's not a thing that I take lightly or I take for granted, and the art of it is very important. It's not you know, sitting there that with this being this intentional, it's very important to me. It's the kind of what you were saying about poetry and the going from poetry to novel writing. Something I think about poetry is it teaches you the rigor of a word, and it teaches you the rigor of a line. It teaches you the rigor of what something looks like on the page. It makes everything so quiet, and it brings down how important are these words, you know, that you have on a page. Like you can have a few lines and they're so important. And so they're like, it's like casting a spell. It's so deep in how you're doing it. And so I think for me, the reason I take this so seriously is I know the impact of what a word can do. You know, I know how deep that can go. And so I try my hardest, and I know I make mistakes, and I can't be as intentional, you know, or not mistakes, but that I make like, I do things, and then they're learning moments, and I learn from them. But I think that it's important for me to be intentional with the work that I create and the work that I put out.
So the sisters, they have had to make an attempt at building a home in this separate apartment that belongs to their uncle. And they have gotten older and must now create a boundary between the space. They're having to put up a sheet whenever the uncle is there. And the rest of the entire apartment belongs to the uncle. He can do and what come as he pleases. And so in it, there's a particular part where you write that they were annoyed that what separated them was this thin piece of fabric, annoyed that their uncle has so much space for himself, and yet he has come for theirs. Is it safe to say that this statement is the equivalent to saying that the devil will do his best to steal your peace? Because that line right there, I think I had to read it a few times because it just kind of like just sat with me. I know what it is to you want to have your own, and somebody is still stepping in trying to take what little bit of joy that you try to have for yourself.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Like I think absolutely, like that feeling of because it doesn't, you see something like that, you're like, this doesn't make sense. Like you have all of this space, you have everything, and yet you want to come down here and there's three of us in this little space, and you still want to be up in here and be like, putting like trying to control everything and put your little hands on everything and do everything. Like, why? Like, if you're gonna leave us alone, leave us alone. Like, but we don't even get that. We don't even get that feeling. And I think it's so true. It's that feeling of like when you're like, listen, if you're gonna leave, if you're gonna like not engage with me, if you're gonna not do this, then why do you still come here and try to pick at me? Like, I think about folks talk about this when they talk about like fuck boys, when they're like, okay, so you acted this way, but then you still want to come around and you still want to act this way. Like, leave me alone. Like it's that feeling of like, yeah, you won't even let me have my peace. Like you won't even let me have like this little thing. Like I can't have anything to myself because then you want it or you want to take it. And that feeling of ownership and that feeling of control that comes from someone when they have that.
Yeah, that's what I felt like even when Kausar is having this conversation with Bobby, and he's like, why'd you stop talking to me? And he's like, bruh, you the one who stopped talking to her because you got you somebody else. Like, let's be for real about the situation. You know that when someone says, okay, that's how it is, I'm gonna ignore you. It always like blows my mind when I see that type of reaction from people. When you're like, really? Like, yo,
Right.
what is it that you really want? Like,
Yeah.
really on that.
And the thing is, what they want is they want the dynamic, right? Like they want the thing where they want to feel like they're in your life or they're doing something or they're around, but then they want you to do it on their terms. Like it's always about control. And even that thing of like, yeah, that moment with Bobby, when she's like, you have Karina, you have all this stuff, you like go and you do this thing. And then it's like, why'd you stop talking to me? And it's like, well, and then in the conversation that Bobby and Kausar are having, where he's like, you're cool, but Karina's my girl. Like, why are you being so difficult? Like, kind of has this attitude towards her, and she's literally not saying anything. Like, she's just like, okay, like, what do you want me to do? Like, like, and then like, him being like, kind of just having this vibe like he's not a bad guy, and like he's young, he's also young, which is like the hard thing about someone like that is they can cause emotional devastation, but they're also still very young and they're figuring their stuff out too. They're not mature enough to maybe realize that that's not something that you should be doing to somebody. But that thing of, you see how much he takes from her and how much she's almost kind of dissociating and not really even being able to put up a boundary because of the environment that she's in, and then how hurtful he can be, and then still pick someone that he deems as being better than her, instead of her, and how hard that is for her.
Yeah, how complicated human life is, and like just trying to grow up and just you just want to be left alone, but there are leeches in the world. And I think for them to recognize that what their uncle was doing also was a sign of, like, to me, like, oh, they're growing up. They're realizing certain things are not supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
But so the authors that we speak to time and time again stress about representation and, finding yourself in literature. How pivotal was it for you to allow yourself to create these characters that may reflect another facet of being South Asian, queer, and Muslim?
Yeah, what was really interesting was when I was like writing this book, I was like, this is just so, to me, it was like, I was like, this is so not, especially having just worked on Miss Marvel and like working on in these other things. Like, I was like, this isn't like a representational book. This is a book about these characters and what they're doing. Right. And, I had a lot of fear about writing this book because there's such few representations of like Muslim people, of South Asian people in nuanced ways, even though there's a lot more now than there probably has ever been, but it just, I didn't want folks to be like, oh, so all Muslim men are abusive, like thinking about the uncle, or like all da da da, like, people can get really unnuanced when it comes to certain things. And I was nervous because of that. And then I was like, it's not my job. Someone's inability to see something is not my job. Like what my job is to write characters and stories that I really want to write and matter and mean something to me, even if they go against respectability politics a bit. And even if they, go into really incredible nuances of what it means to be human. And then also that book, everyone in that family is Muslim and everyone is very different, and so you have Nimu, this character that's so loving and so incredible. And you have the uncle, right? And then you have Auntie, who's so gentle and caring and stuff. And then you have the uncle's wife, and you have this other thing, right? And you have the aunties who are gossipy, but then you have this aunt, and then you have, the differences between Aisha, Noreen, and Kausar. Like you have all of this stuff that's happening, all of these characters, and really it's just a mosaic of a family, of a really complicated family. You have all of this complication of who these characters are, and that kind of almost in some ways is representational, but also has nothing to do with representation because there's so many of them. And to me, I think that's what's really important. And as people of color, as writers of color, as artists of color, we have a thing where we have a certain kind of representational burden put onto us that none of our white counterparts have. They don't have that same kind of thing. And so they're able to write whatever and write stories about whatever and not have it deemed back onto them as, well, what does that mean that you're saying about this thing? Like, what are you saying about this relationship with this person? And it's like, I'm not saying anything. I'm just showing this is a thing that is in the human possibility of being a human. Like this is a story that exists within the possibility of being a human. This is a story that has emotional resonance. And I think that something I realized was even how much I had been policing my own self from creating nuanced characters because I was afraid of the representational question, and how important it was for me to shed some of that so that I could write books and characters that I want to write, regardless of if they fit into a certain kind of representational politic or not.
Yeah, because I think, that burden is always with people of color. They're like, oh, it's not an immigration story. Oh, it's not about the plantation. And it's
Right.
kind of like, then it's not supposed to be you. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes like we're not a monolith. We're not supposed to be put in a box as we've been in a box for so long. Let us write whatever the fuck we want and read whatever we want to enjoy. And I think that's why we really liked your book, because it's there to exist on itself and to speak for itself, and
Thank you so much.
yeah, we love it. We can like fangirl on you and what you've written, but
Yeah, you're in a conversation with two Libras, so we're going to just gush all over you on this book.
but it's the truth. So reaching a space when you are ready to heal, for me, takes a lot of effort and takes a lot of resilience. We've learned also through in one of your past interviews that you've also, lost your parents as well. Besides allowing yourself to write this exceptional novel, in what other ways do you find healing for yourself?
This novel was interesting because I wrote it during COVID, or I wrote a lot of it during COVID. I had written a lot of it before, but the bulk of the work I was doing was when we were in quarantine and we were in lockdown for like 2 years, and it was really hard because there was a lot of isolation and there was a lot of like loneliness, and then working on something that had such hard themes, it was really difficult emotionally. And I think for me, what became really apparent was that I had to have like a robust life that was outside of just my work and the creativity of what I was bringing forth, even though it means so much to me. And so, I had to, it was like the first time that I was doing really active meditation practices, the first time that I was like really, really being like, okay, aside from therapy, what does it mean to live like a lifestyle where I'm well and not just, oh, I have a crisis. So I have like kind of how I would engage with it before, which was like on autopilot, and then, oh, I have a crisis and then this thing. And so this thing needs attention. And then what does it mean to actually think about like, how do you regulate your nervous states at all times? And how do you do things where you're, feeling centered and grounded, and what are grounding practices that exist on a day-to-day level to make me feel good. And even if I don't have time, like if I can't do something that's like big or robust, like what can I do in like 2 minutes? What do I have access to? How do I gain resources in order to be able to regulate in a way? And I think that is just really, really important. And I think especially in the turbulence of the things that so many of us have gone through in the last few years, let alone our entire lives, like I think more and more everyone has been being like, wellness is really important. Like, how do you create things that limit your stress levels, that make you feel safe, that make you feel like you have access to things? How do you kind of really uproot and change certain parts of your life to do that? And so I think for me, a lot of that is around like friendship, community, like feeling really like I have people around me that I can trust, that I feel safe around, that I can have nuanced conversations with, having a robust life that's outside of just art making. And like, doing things like meditation, doing things like yoga, doing things like thinking about eating well, or how to create a diet that feels sustainable and good to me. So really thinking about my holistic living, and not just, this is an issue and I need to fix this issue.
So I would be remiss if I don't say this, because this is truly important. Brown Girls, your web series, had me in a chokehold! Exclamation point. I found this web series after Googling for a show. I wanted something that would feed me like Issa Rae's Miss Education Adventures of an Awkward Black Girl. I love that series so much, and somehow I found your show after doing a search on it and was blown away. It was a gift. It truly was a gift. And I've gotten to a place where I've accepted that I really love watching television. Like, I need it probably even more than books. To me, I love TV. It's just something about being able to consume it, and how people might, get a record and they know the liner notes and who wrote what. I had to find out like who is behind this, and like finding you, to know like you brought this web series to life. It was just truly just amazing. It was before I knew who Jamila Woods was. So just thanking you for like bringing her into my world. And yeah, so
Thank you.
On that note, I just was curious as to like, first wanted to say just thank you for writing it, and then second, like, how did it come to be that you wrote this web series? Because it was so good. It was just
thank you. That means a lot to me. I wrote Brown Girls literally like I had been doing the artist way, and something that I don't know if you guys know that book. It's like a creative, basically like creative therapy. And when I was like doing it, what I noticed like in my morning pages was I was like, oh, I really want to like write for TV. Like, I really want to do this. But I had no, I didn't go to film school, didn't know anybody who worked in TV, didn't know anything. And just was like, people like me don't often get there. This was in, 2015. Like, this is like before all the new surgence of like seeing people of color in TV in a much more intense way than we were seeing before. And I just was right. I would be like, I really want to do this. I really want to do this. And then I was like, cool, I'm just going to try. So I just like sat and like tried to write something, and then wrote something, got a bunch of my friends together. Cause I used to work in theater. I used to work for Steppenwolf, who were like actors and folks who knew things. And we did a table read of it. And when we were doing the table read, my friend Sam, at the time had been like, I really want to do this. And then we were like, cool, let's do it. Like, let's make it. And then we shot it. She shot it. We shot it on $20,000. So it's I know that seems like a lot for me. I was like, that's a lot of money at that time. And then working in film, it's like nothing. Shooting at $20,000 is nothing. So we shot this web series on $20,000. And then it organically kind of had this experience of, we dropped the trailer and then it kind of blew up, and in a way that we didn't expect. And people were like, we really want to see this. We really want to know, we really want to, we're interested in what you're doing. And that kind of, trajectory was really, really magical, and was really, really amazing to kind of see something that was created in such a grassroots way and so organically, like me just literally being like, I'm just going to try to write something, like, friends, will you go do a table read with me? Like, going from that to seeing it be made was really, really beautiful, and a thing that I feel really grateful that I got to be a part of.
Yeah,
Or
that
was a huge part of.
I just want to say thank you again, because it's, you know, it's really something when you are able to find treasures like that out on the internet, you know, this very, you know, for now, free space to be able to go and seek out creativity in that manner. And that show, I swear, I think for a good like year after, you know, I was like, what's going on, where is it going, is there a season 2, what's going to happen? And then to see you like explode and do all of these wonderful things and write these books and just have this career that you are having now, it's been truly a blessing to watch your growth throughout this time. So I'm just like thankful that you back then in 2015 saw like, let me just do something, because it could have just, you know, just been something you wrote down and forgot about, and it turned into something beautiful such as that.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Can we also talk about your short film Retrieval?
Yeah.
So how was that formed? And because, you know, when I saw the trailer, I was like, this is how it would look like, I feel, if your book, When We Were Sisters, were kind of being adopted into kind of like, you know, also maybe a series or a movie. How did that all came about?
Yeah. So retrieval really came because retrieval, so the premise of retrieval is that it follows a soul retrieval in the aftermath of sexual assault. And it came to me, actually, Brown Girls came to me this way too. Brown Girls, I started writing after I had a dream. And it was like, I felt like I could see the scene and I was like, oh, okay. And then I started writing it, you know, and retrieval came to me very similarly. Retrieval came to me through a series of dreams. And then I was like, okay, like, gotta write this thing, you know, and it was but you know, it's a really a lot of the work I do has a personal touchstone at some point, even if it's fiction, there's a personal touchstone into it. There's a personal thing into it. There's a thing I'm trying to get at that feels very real to me. And retrieval it's very personal. It's about sexual assault. It's also about the idea that you can get the part of you that was stuck or harmed back, you know, and it's the idea that you can unfreeze that part of you. When We Were Sisters has a lot of that similar tonally, you know, where it's like, this is the part, like, I'm now being split from my body, and this is the part of me that's being split. And I think that, so it came, I wrote it, and then I was like, I'm making this thing. And sometimes when you're making something, there's nothing else. Like, you're like, this is what I'm doing. Nothing else matters. What I've done before doesn't matter. What I'm gonna do doesn't matter. This is the only thing that matters. You can't see anything else. You're like, nothing else matters. And so with retrieval, it felt that way. It was like nothing else mattered. With When We Were Sisters, felt that way. I was like, if people were like, talk about if they come for us, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I only have one thing that matters to me right now. And with retrieval, you know, it was like, we fundraised, we got grants from Sundance and from Islamic Film Society, Islamic Scholarship Fund and ISF. And then we got, we raised a bunch of money on Kickstarter. And so we basically like got this budget together to shoot this film in very quickly. We were like, we have 2 grants, we have this, like, let's go and do it. So it felt very similar with Brown Rose. It was like, let's go, you know. And then we shot it, and it's complete, it's done. You saw the trailer. We don't have it released online yet because we're applying to film festivals right now, but it came in this way where when the project came, it felt like it was the only thing that needed. It was like, nothing else matters. You need to do this. And that is just, I don't know, when something like that happens, when projects come like that, everything else doesn't matter. Like, it's like something needs to be done. You know, this thing is being asked to be made, and every single thing is showing me that this thing needs to be made. And so I need to make this thing. I need to just knock out everything else I'm doing, suspend it, whatever, and do this. And so that's really what that felt like. That's what that felt like when Retrieval came through. It's really what When We Were Sisters felt like too. But When We Were Sisters was harder because or hard in a different way because it was a novel and it takes a long time and you're just in it by yourself. And I was just like, I want to go have fun. Like, I want to go do something else. But I made Retrieval and When We Were Sisters at the same time. So both of those projects were really like needing a lot of my attention.
When you're making projects like that and you're telling somebody about it, do you ever get like, how you gonna do this?
Oh yeah, 100% every day. But I'm very like acutely aware of the audacity that you have to be in order to be an artist. Like people think you're crazy. Like, you're like, I'm going to do this thing. I feel that it's the only thing that matters. And so I've stopped doing all of these other things I was supposed to do so I could do this thing. And people are like, that's irresponsible. And you're like, I suppose, like, I don't know. There's not really another thing I can do. And then, I remember I was meeting with a grant about it and they were like, so you're shooting in 2 weeks. You don't have the money to shoot. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm going to make this. And I was like, I don't care how, I'm going to make this. And the person on the grant, I remember in my interview, they were just like, I don't know why, but I believe you. Like, I believe that you're going to go and do this, like, regardless of anything. And I was like, it's because I am. And then they gave me money. Like, they were like, here you go, like, go, here's your principal shooting, go make the thing. And I think that thing of like, when you're just like, because sometimes you're just like, I'm going to make this regardless. So either you're going to see me as a good investment and you're going to partner with me, or you're not. And if you're not, blessings, like, deuces, good luck to you and good luck to me. And like, there's not even hurt or pain. It's just like, yeah, go do what you are being called to do. Someone is going to come make this thing with me. Like, because my momentum, I have to make it. Like, I'm already on the path. And so either you're going to be on the path with me or you're not. You're going to be on your own path and you're going to be doing something, or our paths are going to intersect and then they're not. And I think having that mentality is like, especially with filmmaking, it's the only way that you get anything made, is because you're like literally with Brown Girls, people would tell me, they were like, because they were like, there's no white people in the show. It's not, you shouldn't do that. Like, it wouldn't get made. And I was like, I don't care. I don't care. Like, every time, every meet, so many times. And I was just like, I don't care. I don't care. You're saying something to me. I don't care. I'm going to make the thing I'm going to make. And we did it, and I think that thing about that is like, you're just like, I'm going to do the thing, at every project, somebody says something to me. You can't do that. You can't do that. I've been told that my whole life. I've been told that for every single thing I've made. I've been told very extremely by people that I could not do the thing I was doing because it defied convention. It wasn't going to be made. I didn't have white people in the thing. I didn't whatever. There's always something. And I always am just like, cool, I'm going to make the thing I'm going to make. And then I make it, and then they're like, I never said that. Or they like completely then don't remember that thing. And I'm like, yeah. It's okay. I remember. Like, we don't have, I don't have to like bring that up to you consistently, but I surely remember that. And I think that thing about when you're an artist doesn't matter what anyone else says. If you know your vision, you just have to do the vision. You have to figure out who's going to help you make the vision.
Yes. That right there, that's the line right there, the vision, and keeping that. It makes me think of I remember hearing a part of a conversation between Jill Scott and Questlove, and her calling him out and saying that when you heard my album, you said nobody is going to buy that. And it's like, that album was it's the defining. She is on tour because of that album right now to celebrate the anniversary of, like, you, man, told me that nobody was going to buy this thing, and now everybody knows my name. So it's really something when you know yourself, right?
And imagine if she had listened to him.
Right.
And that's the thing too, is also he's good. Like he's amazing. Everyone has lapses or bad judgment or doesn't believe in something. Everyone has it. It actually doesn't really need to say something about you. But when you are the person receiving that, you need to be able to not put that to your heart. You know how there's going to always be people who try to say something to make you not create, to make you not write, to make you whatever. That could be for many, many different reasons. They're afraid, they're scared, they're jealous, they don't believe in you. They really just, you're not meant for them. You're not their audience, like they're not your audience. Like whatever it is, you just have to remember that you can't internalize that, because then that's when you stop making the thing. And what a tragedy. Like what a tragedy if she had listened to him.
Yeah.
What a tragedy, and so I think we have to remember things like that. Like we have to remember that. And we have to remember sometimes we're the Questlove in that moment. Sometimes we're the one being like, I don't know about that. And that's okay. We're allowed to have an opinion. We're allowed to have an opinion. But we cannot internalize other people's opinions to the point where we stop making the things we want to make.
Yeah. So we are at the part of our conversation that we have with everyone. We ask them this question, and we'll give you options. So we either want to know your top 5 favorite books of all time, or the top 5 things that you are most excited about or right now that you want people to know. So you get to pick.
Okay, let me try top 5 books of all time.
Okay.
It might change. We'll see. But in this moment, here, I'm gonna turn on the light because it's a little dark. So I think in this moment, if I were to say the top 5 books of all time for me, and it's not in order, it's just top 5. God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison. Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer. That book was like, I read in high school and was like the reason why I was like, oh my God, like you could be a living writer. Like it blew my mind that you could do that. And I thought it was so well executed. I'm trying to think. I'm like, okay, what else? Ross Gay's catalog of Unmatched Gratitude. And probably Loose Woman by Sandra Cisneros.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen out there.
Can I do a 6?
Oh yeah,
yes, absolutely.
And Dictate by Teresa Heckinshaw.
There you go. All right, that's a solid list right there. Well, Fatimah, I just want to say thank you from the bottom, the top, inside out of my heart for joining us in conversation. This is a top night. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank y'all for having me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. This book was in the National Book Award long list. And when I saw your book, I said, we have to read your book. I don't care how, what, when, where, but I think this book is one of like the books that I would reread as I go through like different stages in like my life. It really holds a special place in me right now, because we read like books weekly, and to encounter a book that would kind of make me like almost like speechless. I'm like, yeah, they have presented, I would consume, end of story. It's usually very very unlikely. So thank you so much. Please don't stop creating. I think, you know, the stuff that you create, whether it be visual arts, written, you know, film, anything that you create, I think
A pancake.
you know, like really, really speaks of like the human experience, and in a world that is close to trash. You know, we need moments like this to remind us, you know, that we need to be kind to each other, that all of us are flawed. We have our shining moments, we have, you know, mistakes that we can learn from. And, you know, moments like this I appreciate, because, you know, this is why we do what we do, you know, to talk to people like you, so more people can hear and read the stuff that you work on. So
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. Thank you both so much for taking the time to read the book and talk to me about it.
And thank you for taking the time to talk to us about everything tonight. You take care. You enjoy the rest of what's left of your day.
Thank you. You too.
All right,
bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed our show.
Make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Vulgar Geniuses.
Our theme song that you're nodding your head along to was produced by Sean Kantrowitz. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Sean Dammit. That's SeanDammit.
Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast. See you soon!
Deuces.